Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hammocks, Handguns, and Hearsay by Tonya Kappes, narrated by Johanna Parker. Chapter 1. Hell in a handbasket. That's what I'd call how this day, this week, heck, this month was turning out. Hell in a handbasket, I muttered and shifted a little bit in my seat. I had to get a gander at what was going on across the grassy median at the Smelly Dog Groomer shop. "What's happening now?" I asked and leaned a little more to the right. I had to get a clear vision of what was going on. After all, I was the one who'd found the dead body inside. Not just any dead body. Colt Lincoln. As in, the Colt Lincoln. Yep. The famous bounty hunter who had his own television show, Colt Lincoln. I looked out the window and took in all the surroundings. The sun had started to set, and several tourists noticed, taking their phones out to get that amazing shot so they could put it on their latest social media with #sunset or #Daniel Boone National Forest. Off in the distance, I noticed Wayne Newton, not the Wayne Newton like the Colt Lincoln, but our local Wayne, who did take professional photographs of the national forest we called home. It was my meeting with him to discuss hiring him to take photos of my upcoming fall wedding that even brought me to the Smelly Dog Groomers. In a roundabout way. Chester, my soon-to-be stepdog, had an appointment to get a bath and nail trim at the Smelly Dog, so I thought it would be easiest to kill two birds with one stone, not happen upon the body where it was a kill one bounty hunter with one bullet kind of thing. I'd been waiting on Wayne to text me back. And when he did, it was after finding the dead body bounty hunter, after which Sheriff Al Hemmer told me to wait outside of the shop. So I'd found myself wandering over to the coffee shop, where it was much easier to wait with a cup of coffee. Still, I glanced around and noticed just how deceiving the Daniel Boone National Forest was. It was like a seduction by a beautiful woman who on the outside was stunning, but where on the inside deep and dark secrets loomed. Pulling up the mug to my lips, I let out a little snort. The tourist lying on the blanket in the middle of the grassy median between me and the Smelly Dog Groomer had no idea that just a few feet away, the star of the show they loved and the bounty hunter they'd made famous, Colt Lincoln, lay in there, dead. My eyes lowered as they warded off the last little bit of sun as it began to dip toward the horizon. The sky transformed into a stunning canvas of warm hues. Shades of orange, pink, and gold streaked across the sky, blending together seamlessly like a watercolor painting. Again, my eyes wandered to the grassy median, the park-like setting between the one-way streets of downtown Normal, Kentucky. The lush green trees and rugged hillsides of the forest were bathed in a warm, golden light, creating a serene and tranquil atmosphere. But here I was, anxiously awaiting what questions Sheriff Al Hemmer had for me. I looked back behind me into the Trails coffee shop, the local coffee house, and over to the living wall that Gert Hobson, the owner of Trails Coffee, had paid a pretty penny for a fancy architect to design to reflect the seasonal foliage of the forest. Wildflowers popped around in vibrant colors, which would make anyone smile, but not me, not today. Chester was lying up against the wall next to the fountain-style dog bowl kept there for the four-legged friends, since most of the time the patrons, who were mostly hikers and campers, traveled with their furry companions. Seeing he was settled, I turned back to the window. The colors of the sky intensified as the sun sank, casting a rosy glow across everything the last bit of rays touched. The familiar shuffle of Gert's hiking boots echoed closer and closer. Without looking, I slid my coffee cup along the table just shy of the edge for her to refill. "Colonel Holtz is there," Gert Hobson said, spilling the turned coffee pot away from my mug at the reminder of the murder that had taken place a couple of hours earlier across the street. "I'm so sorry." She plucked a couple of napkins from the center of the table and wiped up the steaming liquid crawling to the edge of the table before it could waterfall to the floor. "Here comes Al." I scooted my chair back in place and acted as if I'd not been glued to Trails Coffee's front window. "Don't forget the packages I put together for the campground," she reminded me. I'd called Gert earlier in the day to let her know I was dropping Chester off at Smelly Dog and needed to pick up the packages of coffee and filters that she graciously donated for the rental campers and the bungalows. Instead of grabbing the boxes after I dropped Chester off, Hank, my fiancé, his sister, Alice, and I were going to stick around downtown and have a good cup of coffee, maybe visit with Gert, and wait for Ethel Biddle to finish grooming Chester. Speaking of Ethel, my mind curled back to me finding Colt. Ethel wasn't there. Orlean Roth was, though. I shook my head to clear it of even the inkling of the idea that I was going to put my nose into another murder when a flash of a shadow outside the window took me out of my thoughts. I also put some special hiker's morning blend in the complimentary box, she noted as she put an empty mug on the table and filled it up. That's for you, she told Sheriff Al Hemmer as soon as he walked through the door. Al gave a solid nod to Gert before he reached for the back of the chair across from me. The legs screeched across the floor as his eyes fixed on me like he was trying to study what I was thinking. All right, Mae, let's start from the beginning, Sheriff Al said, his brow furrowed in confusion after his attempt at trying to read me. It went without saying that Al Hemmer got the sheriff's job after his uncle, Judge Gab Hemmer, had appointed him for the job as a temporary replacement. Like most things around these parts, we didn't like change. And, well, once you got into an elected official job, it was hard to be scooted or booted out. That's how we got stuck with Al. Dottie Swaggert was right when she said he was fumbly like the old television deputy sheriff Barney Fife from the Andy Griffith Show. He even had the appearance of a much younger version. The tall, thin, long-legged man with a goofy sense of humor. At times it was endearing. Not so much today. Me, Hank, and Alice were going to meet with Wayne Newton here at Trails Coffee to discuss wedding photos. It wasn't like Alice, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, had a say in it, or that we were very close, but I'd started seeing a side of Alice where just a kind hand, or even a nice gesture, would help her blossom into the person I often saw her hide behind. I didn't include how I'd made the meeting with Wayne to be around Chester's appointment. Again, kinda like that kill two birds with one stone thing I'd said about Colt. The door was open, like always, and I walked Chester inside. I shrugged. I didn't see Ethel in there, but I heard Orlean scream. I also left out the part about Chester's hunting dog howl he'd let out. And I found her standing over Colt's body, freaking out. How did the body look? He asked. Dead? I knew what he was trying to get me to say, but I wanted him to say it, not me. Not me on the record of whatever it was that he would write down in his little notebook. You found Colt dead inside the Smelly Dog Groomer, holding a hot pink hair curler that belongs to Dottie Swaggert. He took a small notebook from the pocket of his brown sheriff's vest and tossed it on the top of the table like it had some sort of effect on me. I pushed a strand of my long, curly, honey-blonde hair behind my shoulder and raised a brow. Is that correct? He finally asked, slowly draping his right arm over the back of the chair and then using his other hand to reach for the full cup of coffee Gert had left for him. I could still hear how the bell dinged over the front door of the Smelly Dog Groomer. Help! Help! I'd heard Orlean Roth screaming at the top of her lungs, and it was like I wasn't even in my body. Chester had growled like he'd done when he was a hunting dog, right before Orlean barreled out of the back room. Mae! The way Orlean had gasped my name still sent goosebumps up and down my spine, leaving me with a cold shiver. You know those kind of bone-chilling colds that no matter what you do, you can't get them to leave your body? That kind of shiver, and it had settled deep inside my bones and was still there. I'm not going to say it was Dottie Swaggert's pink sponge curler. I wasn't going to peg my best friend as a murderer, though her sudden disappearance had me slightly baffled. It did look bad on Dottie's part. She'd kind of been dating Colt Lincoln. She'd found out he'd only dated her to get information, probably for one of his upcoming shows. And she did give him the old heave-ho, but not without publicly trash-talking him, which didn't look good on her when I found him dead with the sponge curler that suspiciously looked like the kind she used. Plus, she wasn't answering my calls or texts. That didn't look good. but I wasn't going to tell Al any of my thoughts.
And you didn't see anyone else inside the groomer's when you found him? Besides Orlean, that is,
Al asked, scratching his head and curling his forefinger around the handle of the mug. No, Al. I was just there to drop Chester off to be groomed. I didn't expect to find Colt there, I replied in a shaking voice. I figured on Orlean and Ethel to be there, but not Colt.
Well, it just doesn't add up,
Al said, leaning back in his chair, letting go of the mug.
Why would Dottie's hair curler be there? And why would Colt be holding it?
Maybe it wasn't Dottie's. I threw it out there. Why don't you get it tested for any sort of DNA, if there's a hair on it or fingerprints?
Yeah.
He was quick to answer before he excused himself for a moment to make a phone call. It didn't take a master sleuth to see Dottie Swaggert had popped onto Al's suspect list, taking the #1 spot, a list where #1 was not a winning spot. I tried to recall the sponge curler in my mind to see if there were any sort of details I could compare to the ones Dottie used, but nothing was coming to me. Time. I needed some time to process. It wasn't unusual for a little shock, after something like finding a dead body, to wash over someone, and for the events right after to become a little less clear. In time, small bits and pieces would come back. But right then, all I remembered was bending down to see if Orlean was okay after she fainted, and calling 911. Al came back to the table and sat down.
Do you know what is going to descend upon Normal if we don't find out who killed the Colt Lincoln?
Al's confidence waned, giving me a slight edge to this here conversation. When the world finds out the most famous bounty hunter in America is murdered? I snorted and nodded. Yeah, I know. Boy, did I know. Better than anyone in Normal Kentucky. Heck, for that matter, better than anyone in Kentucky, after my history of being the wife of the biggest Ponzi scheme crook in all of American history.
Yeah, I reckon you do.
He sat up and leaned on his elbows on the edge of the table. My phone vibrated, face down on top of the table.
Dottie?
Al asked after I picked it up and sent it to voicemail. No, I was hoping. My lips tugged in a smile. It was Wayne Newton.
The zealot?
Al's eyes narrowed. He's not a zealot. He's passionate and a great artist, I said, though Wayne was one who liked to live as a nomad in the forest. It was like his art and life being one with each other gave him the opportunity to take in the real beauty, not the surface things, of the forest. The way the lens of his camera had captured the stars and night sky over top of the Daniel Boone National Forest was something I'd never seen before, and soon he was going to be world famous, or at least he would be after I got Abby Fawn Bonds, my sister-in-law and marketing genius, to spread the word about him. He would be a viral sensation. I need to take this. I wagged the phone.
When you're finished, I want you to come back over to the Smelly Dog.
Al stood up. The chair smacked the floor after he fumbled around a bit. Then he went to pick it up, and his rump hit the table, almost knocking the coffee mug over again. I waved a hand and put the phone up to my ear. Hi, Wayne, I greeted him, and dug down into my jeans pocket to grab some cash to leave for a tip. I know we were going to meet up tonight, but something has come up. Can we meet up later this week to discuss the wedding? Wayne mumbled something about some of his buddies coming in, and he was going to be busy for the week. I'd seen him in the park a few minutes before Al had walked into the coffee shop, so I glanced out the window to see if he was still there. I didn't see him. That's fine. The wedding isn't until this fall, so we have some time, I told him as the coffee shop's glass window rattled from a gang of motorcycles driving past. It was hard not to notice them. There had to be at least 50 of them. They were so loud even the conversations in the coffee shop had stopped, and a few customers had walked near the window to watch them drive past. It wasn't unusual for people to drive their motorcycles through the forest on a gorgeous day. The scenery was breathtaking, and the weather was perfect. But I didn't recall ever seeing that many. It was unusual to see a lot of them wearing the same jacket and motorcycle clothing that got your attention and said that this was a real motorcycle gang. I heard there was a bikers convention. Gert had joined me at the window. Maybe I need to make a bikers brew, she said as I hung up with Wayne. You are so smart, I laughed and pointed to Chester. Do you care if he lays there until Hank is done? Hank and his partner, Jerry Truman, had rented out the empty back room of the coffee house when they decided to quit law enforcement altogether and open a private investigation office. They had only gotten tedious jobs that kept them busy, and today was no different. While Chester was going to his appointment at the Smelly Dog Groomer, me and Ellis were going to hang out at Trails Coffee to visit with Gert while Hank did some work in the office. Colt Lincoln changed all of that. Well, at least most of the plans had changed. Ellis had walked down to the normal diner. Ty Randall, her husband, and his family owned the diner. Al had asked me to stay around to get my statement, and there was no need for Ellis or Hank to hang out. They'd not seen anything.
Yes, he's always welcome to stay here,
Gert said. I knew she wouldn't have had a problem, but it was always nice to ask and not assume. Chester would come to Trails Coffee with Hank, so he truly was no trouble, and he was fast asleep like he'd be if he was in Hank's office. I'll be back after I answer all of Al's questions, I told her and stepped out onto the sidewalk, stopping to watch even more motorcycles roll past. There was a brief opening between riders for me to run across the one-way street. Like the customers at the coffee house, the people on the grassy median, the park-like setting between the one-way streets, had stopped what they were doing and watched too. It was interesting to see what got people's attention and what didn't. Take the Smelly Dog, for an example. There was a sheriff car, a ranger truck, and a hearse, all parked in front of the groomers. No one seemed to even bat an eye at the three vehicles. Then there was the slew of bikers driving through town, and everyone stopped. Out of the corner of my eye near the far left of the amphitheater, I noticed someone standing in the shadows of one of the pillars, with his eyes focused on the smelly dog. Chapter 2. I pushed open the door of the Smelly Dog Groomers and was immediately hit by the overpowering scent of wet dog and shampoo, married with the smell of death, a scent you never get used to. My nose wrinkled as I stepped inside and took a deep breath to steady myself.
There she is,
I heard Al say to Tucker Pyle, the forest ranger assigned to Normal. The scene was grim. Colt Lincoln's body lay crumpled on the ground, his head at an odd angle, and the pink sponge curler still clutched tightly in his hand. The room was much clearer and brighter than I'd remembered it being. In fact, after I'd found Orlean and Colt, I didn't stick around too much longer to check Colt out, other than to notice he was visibly dead. Now I could see the source of the injury that had caused Colt's death by the pool of blood that was still wet and gleaming in the harsh overhead light. "Hey, Tucker," I greeted him with a slight smile, which was just a standard way of greeting someone, even though the scene was grim.
I heard you found him.
The edges of Tucker's eyes dipped. The dimple in his chin deepened along with his frown. Wisps of his thick blonde hair poked out from underneath his ranger hat. That's not really factual. I glanced over to where Orlean Roth was huddled behind the checkout counter. Her head was in her hands, and her chest heaved up and down as if she were hyperventilating. I was dropping Chester off for his appointment. The door was open, and we came inside. When Orlean screamed out, that's when I noticed Colt. I wanted to make sure there wasn't any sort of false hearsay running around.
Orlean found him, but doesn't recall,
Al interjected, locking his thumbs in the front pocket of his brown sheriff's uniform pants. He lifted his chin and gave Orlean a glance. I'm sure she's in shock. I shrugged and wanted to give her a pass on her memory of events, knowing bits and pieces would come back over the next hours to days, after her body was no longer in the high anxiety state.
We have the dispatch call, so we know what happened after that.
Tucker frowned.
This is going to be a very high-profile case, seeing it's Colt Lincoln. Man,
Al shuffled his foot.
I loved watching his show. I guess we won't be seeing any more episodes. That's why he was here, right, Mae?
Tucker asked a question I was hoping wasn't going to be brought up. Yeah. I sucked in a deep breath. I know you, Al, and I know you think Dottie did this.
Now, I didn't say that, Mae,
Al stated so he could cover his tracks on any sort of loosely based investigation.
But you can't deny that right there. Al pointed to the biggest piece of evidence against Dottie, the pink sponge curler. Colonel Holtz, the coroner, was bent over Colt's body with his little black bag next to him, doing his initial assessment. He took all sorts of recorded notes and photos, citing the photo number. Anyone can purchase hot pink sponge curlers. Heck, the Piggly Wiggly sells them in cosmetics, aisle 4. I walked around the body carefully, taking in every detail. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. Can you imagine how many people wanted Colt dead? Look at all those shows he did, making people look like big-time criminals when they skipped bail, embarrassing them on national television. This is going to be a high-profile homicide. Tucker said it again, like we didn't already hear him the first time and didn't realize it ourselves. Which is why we have to get this solved fast. Al had said the words I'd been waiting to hear. Does that mean you want my help? Is that why you wanted me to come over here? I asked, knowing good and well Al knew I was pretty darn good at getting information out of people. And you know I'm going to do all I can to make sure Dottie is innocent. And that means scouring every single step Colt Lincoln has taken since he drove his big fifth wheel into Happy Trails Campground. I had one up on them. I'd spent a lot of time with Colt Lincoln since he'd rented the campground space from me at my campground. He was staying at the campground? Al asked. Yes, he was hired by Orlean Roth and Ethel Biddle to help get Otis Gullett off murder charges back at Christmas. By the way Al was looking at me, he had no idea why Colt Lincoln had initially come to the Daniel Boone National Forest. His mouth opened slightly, his right brow cocked as his head slightly jutted forward. That's right, Orlean Roth had contacted him or his business somehow to get him to look into our little town. That's when he read all about me and the laundry club ladies, digging deeper into our lives, when he preyed upon Dottie's kind heart to make her think he was here to date her. As harsh as it sounded, it was the truth. He used our information to feed to Orlean and Ethel, who, by the way, call themselves the Smelly Dog Sleuthers. Without looking, I could hear Orlean moving around. She was listening to every word I was saying. He broke Dottie's heart, I told them, but not enough for her to kill him. I put in for good measure, though it would have been a perfect motive for her. Orlean stopped sobbing, looked up, and then started blubbering all over again. Orlean, is that right? Did you hire Colt Lincoln to come to Normal, and he used Dottie to get information? He showed up too late, as you know. Orlean spit out the fact Otis had been cleared of any wrongdoing a few months before Colt showed up. But with his production schedule, he just had a break to come to town. He'd not known the case was solved. But I had to get Otis free somehow after you tried to put him in jail. She pointed a finger at Al and gave it a good shake. Dottie was mad. There's no doubt about it. And Ethel and I felt bad. We told him to leave town, and we ain't seen him until... She gulped, her eyes moving past us to Colt's body. Now? She cried, throwing her head back in her hands. Where's Ethel? Al asked and walked over to Orlean, leaving me there with Colonel and Tucker. She's at a national dog grooming convention for the week. She left a couple of days ago, leaving me in charge. Orlean's eyes were red around the rims. Al had a few more questions for her, and I took the moment to look around the shop, where the grooming tables were pushed up against the wall, and there were several overturned chairs scattered around. I could see that there had been a struggle, but I couldn't quite piece together what had happened. The smell of death was heavy in the air, made me feel queasy. Here. Tucker, being the southern gentleman he was, pulled out a handkerchief and gave it to me. You look a little green around the gills. I held it to my nose, trying to ignore the sickly sweet odor as I crouched down to examine Colt's body. What do you think we have here? Colonel said, peering over my shoulder. My heart raced as I bent down over Colt in the dimly lit shop, an eerie chill settling in the air. The coppery tang of blood hung heavy in the room. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and put the handkerchief back over my nose and mouth. Colt, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, lay lifeless on the floor. Not just a victim. He had a name. No matter what his reasoning for being in Normal had been, Seeing him up close made me realize he was a victim of something horrible. His bespectacled eyes were wide with the shock of his untimely demise. His plaid shirt was impeccable, but the crimson stain blooming across his chest suggested a violent disruption to his otherwise calm morning. I crouched down, my knees protesting as I examined what I thought looked like a gunshot wound. It was a small, dark hole surrounded by a charred circle of fabric, like a sinister eye staring back at me. The blood that had seeped from the wound had soaked Colt's shirt and formed a sticky, congealed pool on the tile floor beneath him. I wondered how long it had been since the fatal shot was fired. Naturally, I'd also tried to see if it went along with the last time I'd seen Dottie. I tilted my head slightly to inspect the wall behind the victim. The once cream wallpaper was marred by a gruesome spray of blood, dotted with flecks of crimson that radiated outward from the center. Amidst the macabre pattern, a hole no larger than a dime caught my eye, the bullet's exit wound. It was apparent by the lack of background noise and chatter among the various law enforcement people in the shop that they were watching me closely. I stood up and kept my eye on the very small bullet hole in the wall, walking lightly so as not to disrupt any evidence that could be on the floor. I noticed the surrounding plaster around the hole was fractured, forming a spider web of cracks that extended from the bullet hole like the tendrils of a poisonous plant. Al snapped his finger, and immediately one of his deputies started to investigate the hole. Using a pair of pliers, he took out what sure did look like a bullet to me. As I studied the scene, I couldn't help but notice the unusual lack of gunpowder residue on the wall. This absence of evidence piqued my curiosity, and I knew that this case would prove to be far more intricate than it first appeared. Initially, I thought someone had stalked the stalker, which would be the bounty hunter's job, came in, shot him, and left. But the scene didn't play out like that. I had to take into consideration all of the surroundings. That included the overturned pieces of pet grooming supplies in the room. There was a struggle. Sure, Colt and Dottie could have gotten into it and turned things over, him grabbing onto her hair to stop her and pulling out a sponge curler. But I clearly remembered Dottie didn't have sponge curlers in her hair when I last saw her. But for now, I'd keep that little bit of information to myself. We were still at the gathering stages of the homicide, and things could turn around fast. With a determined glint in my eye, I stood up and took one last look at the body and the blood-stained wall. As I turned to leave the room, a small, barely audible sound caught my attention. Was it the creak of a lifted-up tile? Or the whisper of a hidden witness? Or even a fast getaway? The creak went unnoticed, even when I rocked back and forth on it a few times. No one even batted an eye, not even Tucker Pyle. "Looks like murder," I said, finally answering Colonel's question. "Gunshot wound." "You didn't touch or see anything when you found him in Orlean?" Tucker asked. "I didn't stick around to look," I told them. Colonel pointed me back to Colt. Colonel's new assistant had already started to move Colt's body to a gurney and began to start the process to cover the body with a sheet. Colonel stepped up and stopped the process to talk into his tape recorder. Colonel pulled back the sheet, revealing Colt's body. "The victim was shot once in the chest," Colonel said. "The bullet entered the left side of the chest and exited the right side. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the heart, where he died instantly." "Instantly?" I asked. "Yes," Colonel said. "The bullet would have caused massive internal bleeding. He would have lost consciousness within seconds and died within minutes." "What time do you think he was killed?" I asked, again in my head, trying to place the time I'd seen Dottie. "I'd say sometime between 9 and 10 this morning," Colonel said. "Do you have any idea what kind of gun was used?" I asked. Once again, Al snapped a finger, and the deputy ran over with the evidence bag. The bullet had found a home in the corner. Colonel took the bag and instantly had an answer as soon as he laid his eyes on the bullet. "This bullet is a .38 caliber," Colonel said, "but I can't tell you what kind of gun it came from. There are too many different types of .38 caliber guns out there." I knew there would be more clues from Colt's body, possibly a struggle, DNA.
But this was all I had to go on for now. Sobs took me out of my head. Orleanism.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?